When Clint Eastwood sat in her section, Mia had no idea her world was about to turn upside down. She adjusted her apron, glancing up at the worn-out clock above the diner's counter. The familiar tick of its second hand felt like a steady drumbeat to her life. Routine, predictable, unchanging. It was nearing 7 o'clock p.m., the time when the dinner rush usually tapered off, leaving behind a slower, quieter pace that signaled the winding down of her shift. For most people, this little diner, perched on the edge of a lonely highway, was just a stop along the way, a place to grab a hot meal before continuing on their journey, before disappearing into the night toward destinations unknown. But for Mia, this place wasn't just another roadside eatery. It was her lifeline. At 28, she had mastered the delicate balance between long hours at the diner and raising her 6-year-old son, Jordan. Every paycheck, every tip, every extra shift she could manage went toward their modest apartment, the stack of bills waiting on her kitchen table, and the ever-growing list of school supplies Jordan needed. She moved from table to table with practiced ease, her steps light, her smile warm. No matter how exhausted she felt, no matter how much sleep she'd lost the night before, worrying about how to make ends meet, she kept moving. She had no choice. The regulars knew her story, or pieces of it at least. Some had been coming here long enough to notice the shadows of tiredness in her eyes, the way she never seemed to sit down, the way she always made sure their coffee cups never ran empty. A few of them, kind-hearted souls who knew struggle when they saw it, would slip an extra $1 or $2 under their plates before they left. Mia always noticed, but she never said anything. She never asked for sympathy. Life had taught her, in no uncertain terms, that the world wasn't fair, and all she could do was keep pushing forward. The chime of the bell above the door pulled her from her thoughts. Another customer. Another order. Another hour closer to closing. Mia looked up, expecting the usual, a weary traveler, a trucker looking for a quick meal before heading back out on the road. Instead, a man walked in, his presence shifting the very air in the room. There was something about the way he carried himself, quiet but commanding, as if he didn't need to announce himself to be noticed. He wore a simple button-up shirt and jeans, his movements unhurried yet deliberate. A hat sat low on his forehead, casting a shadow over a face that was worn with time, etched with the kind of lines that only decades of life and experience could carve. It took her a moment, just a single second of hesitation. But when he lifted his gaze, when his eyes met hers, she knew. Clint Eastwood. The Clint Eastwood. Mia's breath caught in her throat. Her hands, steady from years of carrying trays and pouring coffee, suddenly didn't feel so steady anymore. She wasn't the type to get starstruck, didn't have the time or energy to care much about Hollywood. Celebrities didn't step into her world. They existed in a different universe, far removed from places like this. But this was different. This was Clint Eastwood, an icon, a legend, someone her father used to talk about with admiration, his voice filled with the kind of reverence reserved for men who stood tall, unshaken, no matter what the world threw at them. Mia could still picture it. Her father leaning back on their old, beat-up couch, the flickering glow of their small television washing over him as he watched the good, the bad, and the ugly for what felt like the 100th time. She used to tease him about it, asking how he never got tired of the same movies. He'd just ruffle her hair and say, "Some things never get old, kid." But he was gone now, had been for years, and she hadn't let herself think about those nights in a long time. Yet here Clint Eastwood was, sitting in her diner, stepping into her world. She forced herself to breathe, to shake off the wave of nostalgia creeping up her spine. This was just another customer. She had a job to do. Clint settled into a corner booth, his movements unhurried, deliberate. Mia knew, without question, that it was her turn to serve him. Her pulse quickened. She grabbed her notepad and pen, inhaling deeply before walking toward the booth. She'd taken 1,000 orders in this diner, probably more, but somehow, this felt different. As she got closer, she noticed details she hadn't before. The way his hands rested on the table, slightly weathered but steady. The way his eyes, sharp and unwavering, seemed to see everything, absorbing the room without giving much away. He looked up as she stopped beside him. His expression was unreadable. A moment passed. Mia steadied herself. She had no idea that this moment, this seemingly ordinary exchange, would change everything. Mia swallowed the nervous energy bubbling inside her and forced herself to focus. This was just another order, just another customer. Even if that customer happened to be Clint Eastwood. She pulled her pen from her apron pocket, flipping open her notepad with a practiced motion. "Good evening," she said, surprised to hear her own voice come out steady. "What can I get started for you?" Clint barely glanced at the menu before setting it aside. The movement was effortless, casual, like he already knew what he wanted. "Just a coffee and a burger, medium rare. No onions." Simple, direct, exactly how she would have expected him to order. Mia quickly jotted it down, her fingers gripping the pen a little tighter than usual. She had taken thousands of orders in this diner, but for some reason this one felt different. Not because it was complicated, because it wasn't, but because her hand had the faintest tremor as she turned to leave. She was halfway back to the counter when his voice, deep and unmistakably familiar, stopped her in her tracks. "Busy night?" She hesitated before turning back toward him. That caught her off guard. Most customers didn't bother with small talk unless they were regulars, and Clint Eastwood was not a regular. "Not too bad," she replied, recovering quickly, offering him a faint smile. "Keeps me on my toes." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her just long enough to make her wonder what he was thinking. "You've got a good pace," he remarked, his voice steady but not unkind. "Not easy to keep up in a place like this." Mia blinked. Was he complimenting her? Clint Eastwood, the legend, the icon, the man who had probably been served by the finest waitstaff in the world, had just acknowledged her work ethic. She wasn't sure what to say to that. People didn't usually notice how fast she moved, how she never let a coffee cup sit empty for too long, how she balanced 5 different tasks at once, without breaking stride. It was just what she did, what she had to do. Somehow, hearing it from him made it feel different. She managed a polite nod, her lips curling into a small but genuine smile, before retreating toward the counter. But as she walked away, her mind buzzed with questions. Why was he here? A man like Clint Eastwood could eat anywhere, fancy steakhouses, 5-star hotels, private dinners in places she'd never even heard of. Yet here he was, in a tiny, off-the-map diner, sipping water from a chipped glass, waiting for a burger like any other traveler. Was he just passing through? Maybe on his way to some film location? But if that were the case, wouldn't he have an entourage? A driver? Security? Instead, he was alone. Mia shook her head. It didn't matter. He was just another customer. He'd eat his burger, drink his coffee, pay his bill, and be gone. By tomorrow, the booth where he sat would be occupied by someone else. A truck driver, a tired family, a group of teenagers looking for late-night fries. She put in his order and forced herself to focus on the other customers. But every few minutes, she found her gaze drifting toward the corner booth, toward the man who somehow made the entire diner feel different just by sitting there. And he wasn't in a hurry. That was the part that struck her most. Most people who stopped here had somewhere to be. They ordered, ate quickly, paid, and got back on the road. But Clint Eastwood? He sat there, his posture relaxed, his hands resting lightly on the table as if he had all the time in the world. Was he waiting for someone? Was he lost in thought? Or was he just enjoying the quiet? The sizzle of the grill snapped her out of her thoughts, and a few minutes later, the order was ready. She grabbed the plate, carefully balancing it alongside the coffee, and made her way back to the booth. She set them down with practiced ease, but as she did, she caught something in his expression. A brief flicker of something that wasn't quite surprise, wasn't quite gratitude, just a small, subtle shift. Acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said simply. "You're welcome," Mia replied, trying to sound as casual as possible. But even as she turned to serve other tables, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an ordinary moment. Something about his presence lingered. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but it was there, hovering at the edge of her awareness. And for the first time in a long while, she had the strange, unsettling sense that this night was far from ordinary. Mia kept herself moving. It was the only way to keep her mind from spiraling. Refill coffee, clear tables, take new orders, repeat. Her shift had fallen into a familiar rhythm, the same routine she had been following for years, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, her thoughts kept drifting to the man in the corner booth, Clint Eastwood. It still didn't seem real. She had served all kinds of people in this diner, truckers, tourists, late-night wanderers looking for something warm to eat before heading back onto the highway. But never someone like him. Never someone whose name alone carried weight, whose presence felt larger than the space he occupied. And yet, for all his fame, he sat there like any other customer. No entourage, no bodyguards, no rush, just a quiet man enjoying a simple meal. She stole glances at him every so often, watching the way he ate. Slowly, methodically, as if he had all the time in the world. Not many people lingered in a place like this. They came, they ate, they left. That was the way of things. But Clint was different. Every so often, their eyes met, and each time, he gave her a polite nod. A silent acknowledgement that made her stomach twist in a way she didn't fully understand. She wasn't sure what to make of it. Was he just being kind? Or was there something more behind the way he looked at her, something unspoken in the quiet moments between them? She wasn't used to this, being noticed, not in this way, not by someone like him. The diner had quieted down now, the evening rush giving way to the slow trickle of late-night customers. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, and outside the highway stretched into the darkness, an endless path leading somewhere far beyond this little pocket of the world. And then, as if sensing the moment was right, Clint raised his hand ever so slightly. A small gesture, barely noticeable but enough to catch her attention. Mia wiped her hands on her apron, took a steadying breath, and made her way over to his booth, careful to keep her expression neutral. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice as steady as she could manage. He looked up at her, his gaze warm but unreadable. "Perfect," he said simply. Then, with the faintest smile, he added, "That was one of the best burgers I've had in a long time." Mia let out a small chuckle, the unexpected compliment catching her off guard. "Well, I'll let the cook know," she said, unable to hide the amusement in her voice. "He'll appreciate hearing that." She wasn't sure what she expected next. Maybe a polite nod, maybe a simple "thank you," before he went on his way. But instead, Clint just looked at her, really looked at her. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that felt different, like he was seeing something beyond just a waitress in a diner, like he was trying to place a memory, connect a thread that only he could see. The silence stretched just long enough for her to feel its weight. "You've got a good energy about you," he said finally, his voice low and thoughtful. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." Mia blinked, caught off guard. Of all the things he could have said, she hadn't expected that. She searched his face for some kind of explanation, but his expression remained calm, unreadable. Was this a compliment? A memory? A moment of nostalgia he wasn't quite ready to share? She had no idea. "Well, thank you," she said, her voice quieter now, unsure of what else to say. Her cheeks felt warm, though she wasn't sure why. "I just try to get through the day like everyone else." Clint nodded slightly, his eyes glinting with something she couldn't quite place. "That's the trick, isn't it?" he murmured. "Just getting through." Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. She wanted to ask him what he meant, if there was a story behind those words, if the weight in his voice came from a place of experience, of loss, of understanding. But before she could say anything, he reached into his pocket. With the same quiet ease he carried himself with, he pulled out a few bills, placing them neatly on the table. But then he added something else, a folded piece of paper. He tapped it lightly with his fingers before meeting her gaze again. "Keep the change," he said, standing up. Then, after a brief pause, "And read this when you get a moment." Mia stared at the note, her heart suddenly pounding for reasons she couldn't explain. "Thank you," she said softly. She wasn't even sure if he heard her as he walked toward the door, his footsteps steady, unhurried. The bell above the entrance jingled, the sound sharp against the quiet hum of the diner. And just like that, he was gone. Mia stood there, frozen, staring at the empty booth where Clint Eastwood had just been sitting. The bills remained untouched on the table, crisp against the faded laminate surface. But her eyes kept drifting back to the folded piece of paper, as if it might burn her fingers the moment she picked it up. What could he have possibly written, and why did he seem so intent on her reading it? Her pulse thrummed in her ears. For a long moment, she considered unfolding it right then and there. She could do it quickly, in the space of a single breath, before anyone even noticed. But then she glanced around. There were still tables to serve, still coffee cups to refill, and Mia wasn't the type to leave her duties unfinished. Even if her mind was already racing with anticipation, even if, deep down, she knew that whatever was written on that note would change everything.